We are live. Hello, everyone. Hello, Jean Marie. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live.
Hello, Liz Owen. Is this how we're going to handle it when the internet goes down from now on?
I just think, it's 2023. You think we would be used to technology malfunctions and dogs racing across camera and cat butts in cameras. And we've had all of those things today. So I'm just waiting for the monsoon perhaps to hit outside.
I would actually take cat butt over internet going down any day, but
100%. Well, I'm going to hop off. I'm going to leave you to it, but I will be here in case anything goes horribly awry. I will be here to keep things going until you can hop back in.
Thank you, Liz Owen.
You're welcome.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. My pronouns are she or ella if you use Spanish, and I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. Every single week, we get together, internet permitting, to talk about something related to LGBTQ equality and inclusion. And this week, we are talking about reproductive health, specifically because we are observing Roe Day, as well as transgender rights, and specifically trans health care and access to that, because there are a lot of scary limitations going on. So first of all, to make sure that you are in the right place to do some reading, and it's really, really good, important reading, especially this week, go to straightforequality.org/STTA live. That's our newest link. You could also use discussion series, but this is an easy one. And you can grab the article from this week, which from the National Women's Law Center, called Our Bodies, Our Futures, Connecting Abortion Rights, Trans and Intersex Rights. It's an amazing piece. We've also got some extra bonus reads up there, include one that was co-authored by our guest today. So I want to get into this conversation as soon as we can. And so to do that, I want to introduce today's guest to really, really dive into an important topic that I don't think enough people connect the dots on. And to do that, I want to introduce Dr. Meredithe McNamara, who's the Assistant Professor of Pediatrics at the Yale University School of Medicine.
Hey, Jean Marie, it's great to be here.
Hey, Dr. McNamara, thank you so much for being here, because I have to admit, the more I read about the things that you wrote, the more excited I got about today's particular show, because I think it's such a great topic, and it's a topic that not enough people get. So before we really get into that, could you tell people a little bit about yourself and a little bit more about your work, so the context for today's conversation?
Absolutely. So my name is Meredithe McNamara. My pronouns are she and her. I am an adolescent medicine physician at the Yale School of Medicine. So what I do is provide clinical care to people between the ages of 11 and 25. And that care, and this is my dog. This is Pippa. So she's going to make some appearances here and there. She knows all about this because she hears me talk about it a lot, and she watches me work on a computer for about 12 hours a day. So I provide clinical care for issues that one might think adolescents would see a doctor for. So menstrual issues, concerns, sexual health, reproductive health, eating disorders, other issues pertaining to growth and development, gender affirming care, mental health, school issues, and then another really wonderful thing about my field is that we're trained to collaborate. So I know who is good at something if it's not me, and I know how to find them, and that is one of my favorite things about my job.
I love that. I always love when I can say to people, I may not be the person for you, but I know exactly the person who is. And that feels so good to make those connections.
Totally.
So you're covering a lot of ground, and a lot of ground that actually falls into places that suddenly have become very controversial, even though they should not be. So for anyone who didn't get a chance to read this week's article, and again, if you haven't, I really encourage you to check that out. Can you talk a little bit more about the connection between abortion rights and access and the rights of people who are transgender, non-binary, and intersex? So what is this connection between control over our bodies and control by governments over our bodies?
Well, I hate to spend my brain cells thinking about why people would want to control and harm the bodies of specific people. But it seems as though some people out there with some power believe that equality is a zero-sum game, and that one person's equality means that another person gets less. And that's probably one of the most harmful, like kind of 360 view themes of health policy out there right now. I do believe that there's a lot of kind of like ideological imposition on individuals where, you know, people in power with certain belief sets feel like others should be living in accordance with them. And then therefore they're kind of putting forth health policy that suits their beliefs, but not others. But, you know, the prosecution and the war on bodily autonomy is raging right now. And the thing to keep in mind is that it's all being justified by bad information.
Yeah. And we're going to get into that because I definitely want to talk about research and polling and what we are seeing and the way it is being used. Because I agree with you. I think a lot of this does have to do with bad information. And I do think you're absolutely right. It has put some of the things that we consider most private, most important into a public battleground. And it's really affecting certain groups of people in truly disproportionate ways. So as we look at the connection between the two issues, and I'm going to say broadly trans rights, and meaning that to also include non-binary when we say that, can you talk about the implications of that Dobbs decision in terms of what the experiences of healthcare providers look like right now and the impact that it's also having on youth? Because I don't think everybody immediately understood when Dobbs happened that that wasn't going to be just about abortion.
Well, you know, I have such a great little story that I think encapsulates the whole situation that we're in. A couple of days after Dobbs happened, I was at work. I was seeing a patient who said to me, "Oh, okay, so you know, like you watch the news, right? Does that mean that I can't get birth control anymore?" And you know, at first I thought, no, are you kidding? Come on, they're not coming for your birth control. Like you can totally get birth control. That has nothing to do with your birth control. And I thought this patient is naive. That was my first instinct. That was my, you know, kind of like my gut reaction. And I totally reassured her and kind of like sent her on her way. But the more that I thought about it, the more I realized, you know, we can talk about how reproductive healthcare is reproductive healthcare, that there's a full spectrum of it, and that an assault on one aspect of it is an assault on all of it. But the thing that I really realized is that young people have come of age in a time when these things were not questioned, and that they also view reproductive healthcare as a full spectrum kind of thing, and that it's not piecemeal. And that really just kind of like hit me squarely in the chest. And I realized the standards the young people are really holding us to as providers and as kind of like those who can safeguard them, that they want it all and that they deserve it all.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Many of them do not know a world in which those things do not exist, in which these levels of acceptance don't exist. And we've talked a lot about, especially in the last 2 years, and certainly in the last administration, where we saw so many rollbacks on LGBTQ rights, the impact it seemed to have on younger people was profound because they literally did not know a world which did not look like the White House lit up in rainbow colors.
And you know what? That's still, I don't want this to be a doom and gloom kind of conversation, because I want us to be very, very clear that that in a lot of ways we still do very much live in that world. And in places where those rights are under attack, there is fierce pushback and an advocacy that that is highly effective. And we're just beginning to see these things unfold. You know, one really important fact that I think is important to keep in mind is that you know, after marriage equality passed, some social science group went and did a study to look at mental health outcomes among LGBTQ plus youth, and found that suicidal ideation plummeted because youth felt safe. And this felt like a great world to grow up in. And I love that example because it just shows the awesome power of any type of health policy, um, within the jurisdiction where it's active and beyond that as well. So it gives us something to really aspire to.
I think it's fascinating that you mentioned that, because we also just saw some data coming out from Trevor Project that was basically saying that given the climate that we have been in because of policy now, young LGBTQ people are reporting higher levels of anxiety, higher levels of depression, very frankly, a much bleaker outlook on the future. So I think it's such a great illustration of this stuff does not happen in a vacuum. It literally does have an immediate impact, which kind of gets me to my next question. So, the Dobbs decision created a lot of panic for a lot of people. We were looking at the immediate effect, which 24 hours later, we saw it all starting to happen. But we're also looking at the long-term effect too. And we are starting to see more judiciary starting to make a hard right tilt, more legislatures starting to make a hard right tilt. And I think as these things happen, tends to be a little bit of that slow burn. People don't always see the impact that it has immediately. It takes a little while. There's that lag, but unfortunately in that lag, there's a lot of damage that can be done. I'd love to talk a little bit about what you, as a clinician, have seen for with both patients, especially as we look at trans and non-binary patients and concerns around their own healthcare. But I'd also love to talk about the impact it has had on providers too, because I think right away we go to the patient side, but it's definitely changed the way providers are behaving, and not necessarily in a negative way. Could you talk a little bit about that?
No, I mean, I feel like it was very galvanizing, and we've really realized that that the misuse or omission of evidence and science from health policy discussions cannot stand any longer. There is a wealth of data out there that shows that people who cannot get safe access to abortion care diverge from their peers on in terms of like every measure of success in life, and we know that now. And I think that physicians, clinicians, researchers are like, we've kind of had enough of people not paying attention to those things. So conversations are happening at in organizations and on the ground and in healthcare institutions on how we can bring our expertise to bear in health policy, in ways that that are actually impactful and do something. That's personally what's kind of like the driving force behind my career right now.
And do you feel some physicians who maybe never saw themselves as activists really feeling that they're going to have to move into this space?
Definitely. I mean, that was me. I never thought I was going to be. I'm always an advocate for my patients in the room, but I didn't know what I was going to be doing outside of it. I have a master's in clinical research. I know how to crunch numbers and do statistics. That I thought my life was going to be about, scientific experiments and studying them and that sort of thing. And it's not anymore. And I also think that it's a tremendous outlet for physicians to deal with and to confront the moral distress that we feel when we care for patients and we feel hamstrung or we feel held back. We're finally ready to really talk about it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think some of this legislation has been so extreme, and some of these rulings have been so extreme. It has forced many people's hands into this, because I think we have entered an area. I know a lot of us made it's starting to look like the Handmaid's Tale kind of jokes for a while, but there are days that the resemblances get a little bit frightening.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to kind of like talk about the specifics of what's happening so that people can like truly grasp onto, that they have something concrete to hang their outrage on.
Yep.
For instance, did you happen to see the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine's lawsuit towards the FDA?
I actually haven't seen that one. Please tell me more.
So it's interesting. It's very well targeted within the, I really am not an expert on our federal courts, but the lawsuit was brought up in the right court for the plaintiffs to try to accomplish their goal. So This particular lawsuit alleges that mifepristone and misoprostol, which constitute the abortion pill,
Yeah.
that the FDA approval of those medications should be reversed on the basis of several things, largely things that are not true. So number one, that these medications have never been studied in several populations and therefore cannot be deemed to be safe or effective. But that's an argument that we've seen in gender affirming care. And, the idea that certain medications never received FDA approval and therefore they must be unsafe for use in pediatric populations. But what that is off-label use of a medication. And
Right.
that is a long established, totally safe thing to do. 30% of pediatricians prescribe medications off label.
Mm-hmm.
So, piece of misinformation number one. Piece of misinformation number two, that the abortion pill or that medical abortions lead to higher rates of complications,
Right.
surgeries, that sort of thing. It's completely the opposite. It's deemed to be one of the safest medications on the market, and it actually is a great way to preserve health outcomes in abortions. So, misinformation number two. Then they start bringing up odd things like the abortion pill actually facilitates sex trafficking without any data whatsoever. And I know that this stuff is very like but this is a very technical document that facilitated this lawsuit, and a lot of work went into it, a lot of money went into it, and it's the same strategy being used over and over again. You could look at the template in gender affirming care bans and transpose it onto this, or transpose it onto the Braidwood decision, in which religious businesses are suddenly allowed to decline coverage of PrEP if they disagree with the behavior of some who use it. It's a template.
It absolutely, and as you started to connect this, I started to think through all of these different examples. As you were saying it, I realized that in the past few years, I have spent more time seeing a piece of, and I'm putting air quotes, research, and finding myself immediately researching who actually did that research, because even what looks legitimate often isn't. Which kind of brings me to the next thing that I was really itching to talk about, which is about data itself. So in the middle of all of this, people are throwing around a lot of statistics, a lot of research, some of which is not really research. And it's no secret, we've even had questions about what is a fact and what constitutes truth and reality at this point. But as we talk about trans and gender nonconforming youth, we are seeing, for example, more polling that suggests there are a greater number of young people who are embracing these identities, who are using these identities to describe their own experiences. And really, we've seen some sharp increases. And we've seen this in some of Trevor Project's data. There was data that was just released in the UK that we saw that looked like this. And it has been twisted in very strange ways. Can you talk about what some of this data means, and what should people be doing as they see these statistics? What questions should they be asking? How do we become better at scrutinizing what is being put in front of us?
So first of all, lucky us to get to live in a day and age when more and more people are feeling free and safe to live authentically. That's the type of world that I want to practice medicine in, and that's the type of world I want my patients to grow up in. So, I think that transphobia and all types of distasteful phobias were deeply ingrained in the way that the initial prevalence studies of gender diversity were done. And so our baseline data is not accurate. So when you make a comparison, if you're comparing it to something that is weak or kind of like poorly estimated, then what are we even doing here? So we have to look at the survey tools that we're using. We have to make sure that they're validated and that they're sound. And we're really starting to have some productive discussions about the history of prevalence studies in gender diversity, but it's difficult to have those conversations substantively when the information is being weaponized. And I would say that we don't necessarily need to be asking questions as a society. I think we just need to kind of turn to to gender diverse people and ask them what they need from us.
I think that's really interesting. And thank you for that point about we don't start with good baseline data. I had often, my default, my brain tends to be to go to the, isn't it great that people can actually have the language for this, the option to actually say the word, the option to be counted. But I hadn't really connected the lack of a baseline point to start with. Everything can be an increase if you want it to be, if you don't start with anything. So thank you for that. As we're talking about research, I know that one of the things that we see a lot, and I actually just came across something this morning when I was doing some reading on something kind of unrelated to this, which is all of this data that we are starting to see around gender affirming care, and specifically things like hormone blockers. There are so many debates about this. And to your point, I think the template for it, we have seen happen in reproductive health too. It kind of moves just over. What do we know so far about this? What do we know about this type of care and the use of things like blockers? Is there a lot of research out there? Is there stuff that we should be talking about when these points are brought up?
Well, we do not have enough time to talk about everything that we know about puberty blockers because it's a lot.
That's the point. I think that's one of the things I want to get out there.
So we know that puberty blockers are really helpful for young people who are in distress and experiencing gender dysphoria, that they need a little bit of time to process their experiences in safe ways and in safe settings. And we also know that the effects of puberty blockers are reversible, that's what we know so far. We also know that this is probably one of the most dynamic and exciting times to be doing this research because we're really starting to see some great outcomes. So the New England Journal just published the largest study at it was conducted in 4 different cities. It was funded by the NIH with a 2-year follow-up period among the most diverse cohort of gender non-conforming and transgender youth in the United States. And what it showed is that so clearly appearance congruence is associated with positive outcomes in mental health. It's just such solid data. And it's very, I don't think anyone saw that and said, phew, now we know. I think everyone said, yeah, we know, and we're seeing it again. Because the goal of scientific inquiry is to try to replicate findings over and over and over again. It's not the sexiest thing, but it's the most robust thing. And we're seeing more and more of that all the time. Now, it's interesting because when you talk about baseline data, I think another great example of this is with puberty blockers. Unfortunately, transgender and gender nonconforming youth experience lower bone mineral density in general. There tends to be more social isolation, less physical activity, less social acceptance, participating in sports. These are all things that are associated with stronger bones in developing bodies. And we don't have a bell curve of data on bone density for trans kids. So we don't know what the baseline truly should be. If you take trans kids and offer them puberty blockers to facilitate treatment of their gender dysphoria and study the before and afters, that's one thing, but we haven't really been doing that. We've just been comparing their bone mineral density to cisgender kids who are have a completely different health profile. So, I think we need to be having really high level discussions about the data that's used as currency in media coverage, but I'm not seeing that in a level that makes me satisfied.
Yeah. And first of all, that was a really fascinating point. I think what a fascinating connection between the social development and the actual physical development and bringing those two pieces together. And I think sometimes people miss that. But I also sort of wonder if we are now spending so much time just trying to defend where we are right now.
Yeah.
If it's kind of blocking us from getting to some of those bigger questions that, to your point, we absolutely need to ask.
I fully agree. I mean, I would rather us stop having ideological discussions and start having discussions about the evidence and about science, and aggressively push for scientific inclusion in places where it should be, but it's even just being omitted, not necessarily everywhere it's also being abused. I think um, this goes to every aspect of bodily autonomy, like literally everything. One's right to housing, to physical safety in their neighborhood, to freedom from gun violence, to access to safe healthcare, to reproductive healthcare, to I get excited, access to full spectrum gender affirming care. You know, if there's evidence that shows the benefits and it's not being featured prominently and it's prioritized in health policy debates, then I think we're doing something wrong.
Yeah. And I think that this distraction that we're taking right now is particularly damaging, because in the time that we're having this distraction, we have people legislating what can and can't happen in the absence of the very data that you were talking about. So we are making an increasingly large number or bigger number of uninformed decisions. So one of the things that we like doing, particularly on this program, is giving people something to do, because we really enjoy helping people understand the issues, but we really want to make sure people do something with it, because it is not helpful just to sit around and be smart. It's helpful when you take that smart and do something to actually change a situation. So looking at everyday advocates, people like me, not trained as a physician, those of us who have the spirit for this, but maybe don't necessarily feel like we can speak to necessarily all the research, what are some of those things that everyday advocates can be doing, both as you look at these two connected issues of trans rights, reproductive and specifically abortion rights? What are the conversations that are useful? Where is it useful for us to actually leverage some of our voices?
Well, I would love for every person who these health policies pertain to feel like they're, how do I say it? I want people to call up their legislators and say, I want you to make health policy based on science. I would love that. That would be so great. and I think
it's not a big request.
I think that people want the state to stay out of the private discussions that happen between them and their physicians and them and their children's pediatricians. I think that people don't want inexpert and biased individuals debating their right to health and to care for their own bodies. And rather than the ideology is deeply important, but I think that everyone trusts and how do I mean to say this? I think it's a universal want, and I think that that people should feel empowered to express those wants to their legislators and their elected representatives.
And I think that's something that all of us can do. And that is something that ultimately down the road affects everybody, the researchers, the providers, the people who are receiving care. And it's something we are absolutely all capable of, dialing that phone number, saying those words, and reminding people that we do vote and that we are watching this as decisions that they are making. That actually is an empowering thing to end with. And, as I think about this, I'm so appreciative of you to sort of reframe some of this for us. The fact that we're even having this conversation, that we're even having this debate really does speak to how much progress we've made, how much this is no longer a conversation just happening in a few spaces, but it's mainstream. It's a healthcare issue. And I'm so grateful to providers like you for doing this work.
Well, thank you so much for offering a space where I can talk about the things that I think about 24 hours a day. I literally dream about this stuff now. And I'm so excited that, just to see how passionate you are and to see like how beautiful this space is and to get to join it for a little bit. It just means the world to me.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. McNamara. Thank you, Pippa, too, for making an appearance. We were so grateful to see your gorgeous face. Thank you so much for the stuff that you're doing. And please, we will be inviting you back because I want to continue this conversation and I think it's going to keep evolving. And thank you for being such a great resource and somebody in the network now that we can all say, go read what she wrote because it's that good.
Thank you. God, that's so kind.
Oh, thanks, Dr. McNamara. Take care of yourself and bye, Pippa.
Bye.
I really love our pet guests. I mean, I really love our smart guests, but the pets are really making it for me this month. So it's another show. That's another wrap up. We have another great program coming for you next week. Let's do what Dr. McNamara said. Let's call our legislators and let them know that we want them to start making decisions based on science, based on facts, based on the research, and to give us our rights to our bodies. If you need any assistance between now and when we meet again next Thursday, please visit us at pflag.org to get all of our resources, to find your local chapter, and to see our pretty new website if you haven't seen it yet. I will see you again next week. We wrap up the exact same way every single week, reminding you to do 3 really important things: to run fast, to laugh hard, and most of all, to please be kind. Again, visit us at pflag.org, and we will see you next week on Something to Talk About Live.